Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Toomey, a partner here at Expedition Growth Capital. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Octave Lapeyronie, CEO and co-founder of fabriq, a terrific Paris-based manufacturing software company that we've had the pleasure of partnering with. At Expedition, we back exceptional software founders who are building high growth, capital efficient, and category defining businesses. For many founded in Europe, the next chapter and often a major inflection point is expanding into the US market. And this conversation is part of a series with Expedition founders and operators who are navigating that transatlantic leap and sharing practical lessons from their journey, what's worked, what hasn't, and how they've adapted all along the way. So, Octave, thanks so much for being here and sharing some insights from fabriq's US experience so far.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Happy to share anything that could be interesting.
Yeah, well, before we dive into the US story, could you start just with a quick overview? What is fabriq and what problem are you solving for manufacturers?
Yeah. So Fabric is a Paris-based 6-year-old company co-founded by my co-founder Francois and myself back in 2019. We're a B2B SaaS company. The sector we work for, as you mentioned, is manufacturing. And the problem that we solve for them is helping them deal with sometimes sluggish operational performance and helping them deploy the operational excellence platforms that a lot of these companies have built over the years that are currently supported by whiteboard, pen and paper, sometimes loosely put together in-house IT solutions, and bringing a best-in-class ergonomic shop floor solution that really transforms their operational excellence systems and takes them to the next level, and in turn, obviously delivering increased operational performance and bottom line.
Yep, perfect. Well, I know it's still early days in the US expansion, but what's been your biggest surprise, both positive and negative, during expansion into the US?
Yeah, and so a caveat, as you mentioned, but we're still just a few months in, so everything I'm sharing today is has limited hindsight. But I'd say the first positive surprise, and this might be a little specific to us, but has been how well our use case seems to carry over to the US. And there's this kind of fear, depending on your use case, that there may be a totally different approach in the US than there is in Europe, a more different culture. And this was something that we feared looking at operational excellence, that there may be a way that European organizations run this in a slightly more systemic approach and more ad hoc in the US, lesser maturity. Thus far, we've not seen that, right? We're seeing a lot of companies that have the right level of maturity to adopt our product and really giving us the confidence that our product as is can carry over to the US and be sold as such. I'm sure we'll hit some roadblocks at some point with some features that are a little bit more US specific, but we haven't run into them yet. And surely there have been cases of European companies going to the US needing to put a lot more work in their product in order for it to be viable for the US market. Maybe on the negative side, even though, and this is very basic of an observation, but we were warned, is just things are expensive. It's just a whole different ballpark, and just be it payroll, office travel, the amount of travel that you need to do just to go see a customer. So in the current context, actually the weakening of the US dollar has slightly helped, but it's still, the economics that we have in Europe, you can't just duplicate those. It's a slightly different economic equation, which in turn is probably going to have an impact on the price that we need to charge in the US.
What do you wish someone told you before entering the US market?
I think so. On this, I don't think to date that there's something that I can say I would have been told that I didn't hear. And that's probably because we were quite diligent in trying to have as many conversations as possible with entrepreneurs who had done the same go-to-market motion from Europe to the US at comparable stages for comparable companies. And actually, that was an interesting experience because we heard a lot of contrasting takes. And I think what's the right approach to doing this is listening to the challenges people ran into and how they solved them, and trying to find some patterns across the different conversations that you had, and also pick and choose what resonates with your business, with your type of product, go to market specificities, and maybe take with a grain of salt the generalized takeaways that some of these entrepreneurs might come out of these experiences with, because they're obviously specific to them. One of those might have been, what it takes, what it costs to go to the US. And people have vastly different, how much cash you have to just pony up in the first couple of years and have the depth of, of cash to be able to sustain a launch and the time it may take to start generating revenue and cover your costs. We heard vastly different takes on that. And ultimately, that took us kind of triangulating and what makes sense in our market and making up our own mind. So there's not, I think I heard it all in various different flavors and colors. And I think we've heard every warning we could possibly hear. It's more about picking the ones that I think resonate the most with your specific path as a company.
Yeah, makes total sense. For a European company, especially one that's bootstrapped, how would you advise positioning yourself to really stand out and win against top US talent, against the sort of better funded or more local competitors that are out there?
So again, short hindsight, but I think we've been quite successful in our first few hires. I'd say that there's uh, a couple of things that probably helped us convince this top talent to join us. The first one is I think you need to have some sort of reassurance during the process that there's not, going to be too big of a cultural gap. In my specific case, having lived in the US, I made a point of taking the first screening interviews and kind of warming people up to the fact that we are an international company. We're not a fully French company, and that it might be a little bit more difficult to work with. And so, to the extent it's possible, if you have someone on your team who's American or who has that cultural proximity with the U.S. and would be pertinent for that first interview, we found that worked quite well, and we got that feedback from our candidates. But more broadly, what I think convinced them was seeing a clear path to how fabriq could be successful in the US. And so I think that takes a little homework ahead of time to have figured out where you can win and how you can win and why your product deserves to win. Perhaps focusing on a specific sector, which is a recommendation that we got from a lot of the people who shared their experiences coming to the US is focus on specific verticals. In France, we address manufacturing in one single time zone, the broader manufacturing sector. We could not imagine covering the entire manufacturing sector in all of the continental United States. It's just too big, everything's too far, and there are too many potential targets. And so you have to focus our efforts. It doesn't necessarily need to be a niche, it could be a very big niche, but make sure that this is a niche that makes sense, where we have strong arguments to win very quickly and convince these candidates that they're about to join a winning team. The other thing is, I would overplay the fact that this is a startup within a more established company. And so you're kind of getting the best of both worlds of joining something at the ground level or the ground floor and being in the early stages of something that may grow very fast. And I think that's going to attract that may actually get a very positive selection of candidates who have that founder mentality, who are excited at being kind of hands-on and going beyond their job descriptions in the first couple of years and being this kind of local founder of a more established company. And at the same time, lower risk, of course, because you've got an existing product with some playbooks, a lot of assets to rely on. And so there's not that risk of finding product market fit. It's more, an execution risk of whether or not you're going to be able to sell this product in the US. And we found that this is something, and actually selecting candidates who found that exciting was an important way for us to find the right people. And I would overplay that aspect of the value proposition that you can make for these candidates.
Yep. Okay. You initially held off on setting up a US entity and hiring locally. What factors shaped that decision?
Yeah. So our specific case is that we had existing business in the US, I'd say pretty meaningful business in the US prior to officially setting up shop there. A lot of the organizations that we work with are international, be they European or US. We work with them starting in Europe and then may eventually work with some of their US based operations, manufacturing sites. And at the scale that this existed, we managed to cover this from Europe. It took a little long distance traveling, and sometimes, something that works at a small scale is not going to work. We can't send over a a customer success team member over the U.S. every time we need to kick off a new project. But for a short amount of time, this worked, and we managed. Having this established. Or this first presence in the US is actually a factor that convinced us to invest more and spend more time and actually build a go-to-market team there. And the fact that we managed it from Europe allow it to push it back and to avoid this kind of threshold effect of, you're raising money to go to the US and starting from scratch with that money, right? You're essentially, what we were doing is raising money to put more money into something that already existed in embryonic form. But the other reason we held off obviously is the cost. We didn't feel, there's other levers of growth that we could self-finance with our cash burn at the time being quite low and even turning positive before we raised money with Expedition. That said, the US there's a depth of cash that you have to be willing to put up on the table in case things take longer than expected. It's very easy to miss a hire and lose 6 months in the first few years, and we felt that cost was too high, and that would get us way too quickly close to the precipice in terms of just cash reserves, and not an investment that we could cover ourselves. And because it is a long-term commitment, it's not something you can necessarily just turn on and then turn off and then turn back on. Once you're there, you're there. You've hired a team, and it's a commitment over a few years to commit to payroll and some fixed expenses there. So you have to be able to go to the distance, and so that's why, knowing what it entailed, we held off on doing this before we had raised money. I'd say the last piece of the puzzle is, given the overwhelming challenge that it seems, and, sometimes intimidating, is we felt a little bit underexperienced and under-equipped as a team to make this move, and bringing Expedition on as a partner, and not just a financial partner, I think kind of got us over the finish line in terms of building up the confidence that we're going about this the right way, and that we've got someone on our team that's going to help us navigate the roadblocks and eventual headwinds that we know we will run into. It's not easy to build operations from scratch in the US, and having someone with that experience on our team obviously helped in getting us over the finish line and making this call.
Yeah, so fast forward to today, you've now entered the US with a small initial team. What's driving that approach, and how do you think about sequencing the next roles or functions within the first couple of hires?
Right. So I think there's a first mini core team that you want to build. We're sending over someone from our Paris office, a long-term early employee of Fabriq, someone who's going to be able to be a relay of our company culture, know the product in and out, know the go-to-market playbook and sales playbook generally, and be an ambassador for that. But also building a close-knit team that it's not easy to be, to be doing this alone. And so having an office, hiring a small team that can, work as a unit and feed off of each other. So this is where, why we chose to have initially a team of 4 or 5 people. We are really in with the intention of just trying to score quick wins. So we're hiring people who are going to work existing accounts in the US and try to develop business there in a kind of familiar, lower risk environment, let's say, than going out and spending money on new business generation. But also finding the people that are going to be as autonomous and complete in sourcing these deals and closing them. So, right? So the first hires that we're focusing on sales and marketing, but it's more senior AEs who are willing and have the motivation to generate their own sales pipeline, and someone on the marketing side to help us build that initial awareness and demand gen to feed into these these AEs. Because we have existing business in the US, and North America as a whole, we've already hired someone in customer success and someone that we're going to be able to leverage on that existing business. And we don't have to wait for those first new US accounts to land, to give work to. And then down the road, of course, we'll expand the team, hire more on the BDR side, of course. And as the team grows, we're going to need to hire some functions, support functions, HR, finance, etc. As soon as we reach the right scale. There is a question mark which I think is, whether or not we want to have someone on the tech support, customer care, someone that can put hands in the code, perhaps put hands in the data. And there's value in being in the same time zone. And there's also value in certain industries and working with certain types of American companies that the people touching customer data are American citizens on American soil. So there may be a few special roles that we localize, but ultimately our goal is to keep our entire product team based out of Europe and only targetedly hire people on the product side in the US on a need-only basis.
Yep. And maybe just to close it out here, what are your top 3 tips that you would give to a European founder preparing for US expansion?
The first thing and which we did and what I mentioned earlier is speak to as many company leaders as possible who've gone through that same experience and may have longer, shorter hindsight. And this is very basic of a recommendation, but like there isn't a thing as too many calls. I think taking these calls, which at the beginning are a little bit, because you're going to hear different takes with vastly different recommendations, can be a little bit disconcerting. But with hindsight and having done a sufficient number of them that you'll see the patterns and the ones that apply to you, I think really will reinforce your approach and the confidence in that you're going about it the right way. Obviously, if you've got in your stakeholders, investors, mentors, etc., people who can be on a higher frequency, not just a single call, be your sparring partners. Use those as much as possible. This is also relatively basic, but we chose to outsource and get help on everything admin and legal for the first few months. It can be really tough to navigate, and we just don't feel this is where our time is best spent in the initial stages. And so we found a partner. They happen to have, they're a French American company, and really is kind of this focal point that they may not cover everything, but they'll help you with payroll, benefits. They'll push you to the right lawyers for visas. They'll take care of incorporation. They can do accounting, invoicing. It's kind of whole palette of services that you can pick and choose a la carte, and having that has just saved us a lot of time and the peace of mind to focus on what's important. And so and as a bootstrap company, we have this tendency sometimes to want to do things ourselves because it's cheaper and it's more pragmatic, but there's a pretty high cost at trying to figuring this out, and it's just energy not well spent, I find. And ultimately, outsourcing it, I think, probably ends up being considerably cheaper when you look at the real cost of what you're spending your time. The last part, and this is again to echo on Expedition's role in how we've set up the first stages of fabriq in the US, is lean on someone for hiring. It's especially the early stages of screening. First of all, taking screening calls, there's a high volume, there's a time difference. It's going to be difficult to fit them in your schedule from Europe. You're going to have a limited window of time. And if there's a trusted partner for us, it was Aaron at Expedition who really sourced high quality candidates and avoided us these kind of unnecessarily early stages of an interview process with candidates that just didn't fit. And because he understood very well what we were looking for, and as someone who delivers very high quality work, saved us a lot of time, and helped us maximize the quality of candidates that we spoke to. Conversion rate ended up being quite high, specifically on certain roles. We didn't have to speak to too many people in order to make those first job offers. Of course, you do need to screen yourself, right? You first candidate that is presented. I'd say these are the 3 things that in these early months are generic enough that they would apply to any company trying to come to the US, regardless of the nature of your business, of your product, your go-to-market. So hopefully that's useful to anyone watching this video.
Amazing. Well, Octave, thanks again for taking the time to share your experience. I know many founders across Europe are thinking about this same transatlantic journey, and your perspective will be incredibly valuable as they chart their own path.
Great. Hope it helps. Thanks, Steve.